That's recording.
Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming out tonight. My name is Laura Siever. I do a bunch of different things for the club, but I'm here tonight in my role as ski clinic administrator for this season. And I just wanted to give you a quick idea of how this lecture came about. Mark and I were talking about these backcountry clinic tours, and there's a lot of stuff to talk about in the transition to backcountry. And I don't know what you guys are going to talk about, we'll find out, but we decided that it would be way nicer to have a lecture to talk about all the talky stuff inside in the warm instead of at the trailhead. So I booked the room, and here we are. So I know a bunch of you here are either signed up for this Thursday's intermediate Nordic tour clinic with Mark, or next Thursday's with me and a bunch of other instructors. So if you have any questions after about those, grab one of us. Otherwise, I'm going to turn it over to Woody Keene and Mark Waters. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Laura, for doing all of the website work, because that is way more work. This is just play.
This is the fun part.
This is the fun part. But you put a lot of work into the Nordic Club website this year. So my name is Mark Waters, and I'm here with Woody Keene, and I asked Woody to accompany me with this lecture so that basically you can get a perspective from both of our experience. We have cumulatively, not individually, 100 years of experience or so. That would be weird if it was, yeah, we'd be really old, but we're already really old. But Woody, how did you get into, let's talk a little bit about how we got into this, because we won't take a lot of time to do that, but how did you get involved with touring?
I was working in a backpacking shop in 1977, I believe. We did backpacking, climbing, mountaineering, and we brought in cross-country skiing, and I bought my first pair of cross-country skis in probably 77, 78, been skiing ever since. I was a climbing instructor, worked for the North Carolina Outward Bound School. In winters, I blew snow for one winter, which was the least fun job I've ever had in my life. But then also helped run a cross-country guide service based out of North Carolina, but we were right on the Tennessee-North Carolina line. High South Nordic Guides. We did day tours, we did lessons, we did clinics, and then we also taught telemark. So yeah, since the 1980s, I've been involved in skiing in a big way. That might sound weird coming from North Carolina, but we used to get snow. And actually it has better ice climbing than Oregon does. True fact. How about you?
I started skiing about age, I'm so old I can't even remember, but I think it was about somewhere between 10 and 12. And I started out with alpine skiing. And I transitioned to, well, I didn't transition to just Nordic because I've always done both. And that's where there's going to be a few different points between Woody's background and mine. And there's not just one way to do backcountry skiing. There's a whole panoply of different approaches and ethics and styles that one can manifest in their pursuit of backcountry travel. So I asked Woody to come because he got into it primarily from the touring end. I started alpine skiing and transitioned to cross country. About 73 or 74, I started telemarking. I taught telemark skiing. I actually taught the first telemark lessons in Vermont that ever happened in Vermont in 1977 at Mountaintop Touring Center in Vermont.
Before Dickie Hall.
What's that? No.
Before Dickie Hall.
That was before him, yeah,
Wow.
by about a year. I think he was at Blueberry Hill. And so I've been in the industry. I had along with a fellow who is now the CEO of Scarpa, Kim Miller, he and I in the mid-'80s for a few years had a telemark, and back then it was called Randonnée, but alpine touring ski school at Berthoud Pass in Colorado, and we had a guide service there. So I did guiding, but I've always loved freeheel and alpine touring both. Woody's background is primarily telemark, right?
I've never been on a pair of alpine skis a day in my life.
So the reason he doesn't do locked heel. He doesn't do locked heel, and you ski parallel once in a while, right? But you primarily telemark.
Yeah, I mean, when I'm skiing at the resorts, I skied today and I was 95% tele turns and then some
Okay.
parallel.
And when I ski backcountry, I'm usually somewhere on the other end of the spectrum. I ski parallel with free heel. This is my, and we'll get into gear, but this is my standard free heel setup. And I probably ski 80, depending on conditions, probably 80 to 90% of the time I ski parallel. And I telemark when the conditions really call for it. And Eric Ness, who used to be the president of the Nordic Club, and I skied up above Bear Lake on Todd Ridge the other day, and the conditions were hellacious. Tree bombs, refrozen ice crust, and the telemark turn free heel. You don't want to try and parallel in that mess. So it was telemark all the way down. So that's kind of my background.
And for those of you that don't know, randonnée is French and it means can't telly.
And yes.
And AT means already tellied.
Yeah. Like he said, free the heel and free the mind. Right? So I've made some notes here. I will not read a script. So I vow to you I won't read from it, but I want to remind myself of what we want to be talking about. So basically we're going to talk about how there's a very wide spectrum of conditions and terrain that one can approach when traveling in the backcountry. So there's a wide spectrum of equipment. So we're going to get into talking about gear. We're going to talk about the differences between groomed and ungroomed skiing, low angle versus high angle terrain, or you could look at it like Nordic or cross-country terrain versus like alpine ski mountaineering terrain, which is, it's beyond the scope really of what we're going to talk about here, because this is kind of an introductory approach to what we're doing. Relationship of gear to terrain to your personal skill levels, navigation and safety. So I've got some questions for the group here, just like with a raise of hands. How many have a background in cross-country skiing and you basically just skied groomed conditions like Meissner or the Nordic Center at Bachelor? Show of hands. How many people have only done that? Okay. How many people have done a little bit of groomed skiing? Okay. How many people are alpine skiers? A lot of you. Okay, that's interesting. Good. How many people have done primarily telemark skiing but haven't really done any backcountry? Okay. So primarily people that are here are interested in something like what we're doing on Thursday, which is the tour clinic trip that we're doing at Swampy Loop, correct? That sort of thing. So you're making the transition from groomed, or what they call in Europe, piste, on-piste versus off-piste. Yes?
I'm just wondering about, so what do you define as backcountry?
Excellent question.
And
Very good. I've been talking too long, and I'm going to let Woody answer that.
Great question.
Very good question.
And it's really important. And it's really, how many of you are hikers? So in hiking, what we often might refer to as front country hiking, when there's a ton of snow, it is no longer front country. It is now back country, right? And the way that I would define it, me, and he might have a slightly different definition, is if it's groomed, it's front country. If it is not groomed, it's backcountry. Automatically, it's backcountry. You don't have to be in a big W designated wilderness area for it to be backcountry, right? So for me, backcountry determines a lot of things and vice versa, and that is, well, what kind of gear do I need, right? If I need a wider ski and I need a ski that has metal edges to be able to go safely navigate a particular trail that I want to do, that is, in fact, backcountry skiing, right? Or another way to think about it is, if I fall down, how many people have fallen down? I fall down occasionally. Barb has seen me fall down recently. If you fall down, and in the process of falling down, you get hurt, if you're at a groomed area like Meisner, what's the outcome? The outcome is it's going to be pretty easy for, search and rescue to carry and get to you relatively quick. If you're somewhere further back, maybe on something that's relatively narrow because there's trees right here and there's trees right here, the chances of them being able to get in with a snow sled go from here to here. That's backcountry, right? The rescue time involved of getting you safely out of the woods changes when you're in the backcountry. I had a friend, my wife was skiing with a friend on Flagline probably 4 or 5 years ago now, and she tore her hamstring really badly. They got her out that day. She has had troubles ever since. And it had to do a lot with response time. So that's the way that I think about it, is more remote. How are you going to get rescued? What equipment do you need? And still, you can be on a Blue Diamond Trail, but it's not groomed. And to me, I would think of that as backcountry.
So, yeah, excellent question. And I wrote a lot of notes on this, so just buckle in. So first off, I wanted to say, the reason that I got into backcountry skiing is I started skiing in the Northeast, where basically you're skiing on boilerplate ice. Yeah, you have permanent calcification of the hips from all of the bruising that I suffered with as a child from falling on that ice. So it wasn't, for me, I like still skiing at resorts and ski areas, but for me, when I was a kid, I saw a picture in a ski magazine, it must have been Ski Magazine, of people that would climb up Mount Hood, and it blew my mind. It's like, oh my God, you can ski where there's no ski areas? And that just captivated it inspired me to pursue what I've done for most of my life, which is the pursuit of skiing natural snow. And that's the definition for me of backcountry skiing, is you're skiing what is unmodified by man. It's like the difference between, this is kind of an extreme example, and I don't want to insult anybody that plays golf, but it's like the difference between hiking on an 18-hole golf course and hiking the Appalachian Trail. Okay, it's not manicured, it's not maintained. You don't have a lot of people usually around, and so you're in natural surroundings, and it's very much like what Woody said. It's like hiking.
The Appalachian Trail, by the way, is pretty crowded nowadays. But
yeah, well, I was there.
your reference points are way back.
Okay, yeah. So the other thing that kind of defines backcountry skiing, that as you start to do it and you'll be aware of, is groomed skiing is like, how many cyclists are here? Everybody cycle. How many road cyclists? How many mountain bikers? Okay, so here's another analogy. I like to use analogies. I'm simple-minded, so I like to use analogies. Jesus would call them parables, but I call them analogies. So skiing groomed conditions in terms of the surface you're dealing with is similar to road cycling. You have very little variation in the surface of pavement. It can be smooth pavement. You can sometimes have chip seal. It can sometimes kind of be crappy pavement, but it's basically uniform. But if you're a mountain biker, you know how wide the surface can vary. It can be, I've mountain biked stuff and bike packed in places where dirt roads are smoother than most pavement, like, asphalt, all the way to things that it's just like an oh heck moment, when you drop off the edge and it's just a black diamond rocky. So that's a similar analogy to backcountry skiing, because you've got this enormous spectrum. When you refer to backcountry skiing, you're basically just going out in the woods either on prepared trails that are cut and maintained by the Nordic Club, like a lot of stuff that we ski, you know, Todd Lake and Big Meadow and so forth. But you can also extend backcountry skiing, the definition of it, to off-trail stuff where you're just finding any route you want to go up Tumalo or Vista Butte. And so the variation is, the terrain is generally more extreme than going to Meissner. You can run into much steeper terrain or flat terrain, but it can vary, flat to rolling. But the other thing that can be different is the surface, because groomed snow skiing means that you've got a groomer that sets the tracks. So they set the track for the skaters, so it's a nice flat, wide surface for them to skate in, and they set tracks for, as you know, if you've been skiing, you know, in these sorts of environments, you've got nice tracks that are set wide enough for what most people would term as touring skis, narrower skis. These don't work so good in tracks, I can testify to that. So the surface of the snow is pretty uniform, and you can have some variability. You can go up there on days when it's kind of icy, or it's kind of slushy, or it's kind of slow, but it's basically a two-dimensional, within a certain range of conditions, pretty even. And it's ideal for cross-country skiing in most ways. When you get to the backcountry, it can range anywhere from really deep, like where you're breaking trail above your knees, to trail that is broken, and you can kick and glide and really, really get a good pace going like you would on groomed slopes. But there's more variability in terms of little dips, drop-offs, places where tree bombs may drop where it's then frozen and it's icy. You're not going to run into that so much. So you need to be more dynamic and aware of the changeability and the variability of the conditions, if that makes sense. Yeah. Does anybody have any questions about that?
The one thing I would add is also what you're carrying with you and preparation for what
that's a
you're
good
carrying
point.
with you. So if
Yeah.
you're going out for a skate and it's going to be a 5 mile, or we would call it a 10K skate, you might have a fanny pack. You got no clothing, you got a fanny pack. That's it. We see that at Meissner all the time. And I would say at Meissner that's relatively safe, because how often are you going to see somebody? Pretty often, right? But when you're skiing, you know, off of groomed, you need to carry a lot more stuff, you know, and we're going to get into what we think you need to carry, but you know, you definitely need to be prepared for the what ifs. What if your binding breaks? Has that ever happened, Barb? You need to be prepared for what if someone falls down and they're kind of stuck and they can't get up on their own. You need to be prepared for, you know, so many what ifs, and that's where these larger packs come in as opposed to the fanny pack. So that's another way that I would define it. And good pointing out that, you know, yeah, marked trails, but then we had a ski the other day, and how often percentage-wise, how often were we off trail? Like 80, a good 80%. I kind of got us lost, sort of, not really. But we were off a mark route 80% of the time. So yeah.
So the range, yeah, go ahead, Paul.
You're talking about backcountry skiing. The one I remember the most is Baseball Crush.
Yes. Yeah. See, the snow falling out of the sky can take an infinite range of forms after, you know, depending on the temperature when it is that the snow is falling, the effect of the sun on it temperature-wise.
Elevation of the clouds that it's falling from.
Yes. Temperature, gravity, wind. When I moved from Ithaca, New York to Boulder, Colorado in 1972, specifically for what was then called ski mountaineering, then became randonnée, is now alpine touring, and the freeheel stuff as well. And so you get a lot of cold temperatures with a lot of wind in the Front Range of Colorado. So the term we use for breakable wind crust is death cookies, because they were like death cookies. So, but yes, so you have to be aware, and that gets into some other things that we'll talk about in terms of technique and safety. You have to be aware of changeable conditions. Another thing that you may have seen on, and we'll also discuss this a little bit in safety, is the whole issue of tree wells, which when you're on the flats, flat to rolling terrain is usually, as long as you're careful, you know that there's a tree there with a big crater around it, and you're not going to go into it. But when Woody and I are skiing things like Tumalo, which is once again within this broad spectrum of backcountry skiing, you have to be careful you don't cut in too close to a tree and drop into that well and end up head first down, and it's really hard to get out of it. It's almost like being in an avalanche condition, which, once again, that spectrum of what can be termed backcountry skiing runs the range from things that are as easy as the beginner loop, which is flat, pretty much flat up at Meissner, to Swampy, all the way to skiing, the couloirs on Broken Top. So it's a large term, and what I'm hoping we'll be able to give you here is a sense of what backcountry skiing in the backcountry is like, and the direction that you want to go with it, so that you can select the gear that's appropriate for what you want to do based on your physical fitness level, your condition, your technique, and your aspirations to, I want to ski Broken Top couloirs next week, all the way to, I'm just fine with a beginner loop. So whatever you do, it's wonderful to get out there, and that's the beauty of it, is that you're out in a quiet environment, you're out in nature, and even when you pull into Dutchman or Swampy, and the lot's like filled, you'll find that you get out on the trail and you hardly ever see anybody out there, because there's so many miles that the Nordic Club maintains these trails, and on a busy weekend, even a busy weekend, you rarely see, you'll see a few people on the trail, but it ain't busy. It's not like skiing at Meissner. So there's a sense of solitude and quiet, and that's wonderful.
And it's more intimate.
Yeah.
It's definitely a more intimate, because Meissner, all groomed trails are basically roads. There are non-groomed Nordic trails that are still roads, but there's a lot of, that are actually trails, what I would call single track.
So let's talk about one of my favorite things to talk about, and I think Woody's too. Gear. Yeah, I worked in a lot of really cool ski shops in Colorado and in Vermont, and I love gear. I'm just cheap, so I look for used gear. But before I forget, there's three really good sources for used gear. If you're looking so I don't forget about it, there's Gear Fix. Everybody know about Gear Fix, right? That's like the most popular place. I've given them thousands of dollars over the year, but I've saved thousands too. So there's Gear Fix. There's Latitude 44 that frequently has some good used gear. But the newest shop in town is a shop called Second Wind, where Hutch's West Side vacated. So they're there now. They've got the best prices going there, and you sent me a picture of my old boots.
Your boots.
Did you buy those?
They're not my size.
Okay, yeah.
And I already have leather boots.
Oh, okay, yeah.
It's Merrill Super Comps.
Yeah. So, Woody, do you want to open the discussion of gear, and then
Sure.
we'll go back and forth,
Sure.
because he'll have a different perspective
Yeah.
than me in certain ways, but we'll have a lot of overlap.
Yeah, so again, as he said, there's a spectrum of what we would consider backcountry, and if you're listening to us for very long, you're going to figure out that we both have a quiver. And I have an equal amount of quiver for resort telemark skiing. Yesterday, how many skis did I ski on yesterday? 3. And 2 different boots. So, there is a quiver, and you may be a quiver of 1 because you're only going to do this much. But as your range of what you want to do goes from here to here, that quiver is going to get bigger. It just is, because there's not going to be one ski and one boot that's going to do everything that you want to do. If you want to do what we do, it just isn't going to work, But if your range is here, then yeah, you can be a one quiver kind of person, right? But obviously we have a lot of different things demonstrated here. Last time I skied, which is 2 days ago, is that right? No, I skied telly for the past 2 days. So 3 days ago, I skied this ski, which is an 88. When we're talking Nordic skis, more often than not, the one exception would be Matthews, we're talking about the width at the shovel up here. When we're talking about alpine or dedicated telemark skis, we're going to be talking about what the width is underfoot. So it's a little confusing, but in Nordic, we're going to talk about what is the widest part of the ski. So when this says 88, then that's referring to up here. And then the 189 at the bottom is going to refer to the length of the ski. And the length of the ski is going to depend on what your height is and how much you weigh. So it could be someone that's my height, 6'2", and they weigh 145 pounds, so they're significantly lighter than me. They're probably going to ski a shorter ski, because if they ski a ski that's too long, they're not going to be able to compress the camber enough to where they get good traction. Right? Does that make sense? So if you look at my wife's 112s versus my 112, right? Obviously there's a length difference, but there also is a camber difference. My camber is a lot stiffer because I'm heavier than her.
Can I show them the bottom camber on these?
Yeah.
Remember to say those numbers are millimeters?
They're centimeters and millimeters. That's where. So the 88 is millimeters, and the 189 is centimeters.
And this is your bottom camber in your, what would be, if it was a waxable ski, it would be called a wax pocket. Does everybody see that? The space there. When I worked at a ski shop in Boulder, we used to check the weighting of skis. We'd have them stand on a flat tile surface, linoleum surface, and have them stand with both feet on both skis before they were mounted, equally weighting. And we were able, if you're able to put a business card underneath it.
We used $100 bills, but
Well, you got a lot more money in North Carolina, evidently, than we did in Boulder. But yeah, so that way when you are weighting the ski, that it flexes out and you can get the wax pocket or the no wax base. And we'll talk about no wax bases a bit.
yeah, so if you go buy a set of skis and they don't do that camber test, my advice is to go to another shop, because they're not really giving you what you need, right? So that business card trick is, if they can easily pull it out, you're not engaging the camber, you're not engaging the track pattern, whether it's wax or waxless, you're not engaging that enough. So when you're standing on it, with 1 foot, it wants to be snug. Okay?
One thing that should be said up front about the differences between a Nordic approach, which has the bottom camber has a no wax base or even a waxable base, but it has that bottom camber and is designed primarily for efficiency, for covering ground, for going forward and covering distance. Okay, alpine skis are designed for turning, so they don't have that wax pocket, which means they don't glide as well. The whole idea of the wax pocket is when you weight it, you're compressing, you're getting it to stick so that you can glide forward, and then you're gliding on the other ski and you're not dragging the wax pocket. Alpine, more of an alpine type camber, means that it's not going to be as efficient for gliding, especially if you do, and we'll get in a little bit into alpine touring, which is a little beyond the purview here possibly, but it may help you understand some of the differences, because alpine touring has gotten very popular. But the other problem with alpine touring, as we'll talk about in a little bit, is you have to use climbing skins, which attach to the base of they glue to the base of the ski, not permanently, but they've got a lot of drag. So alpine touring is really more about the turning than the traveling. Therefore, they kind of suck for long distance miles of flat to rolling terrain versus the kind of gear that Woody's holding up, which makes more sense for the terrain in this area. When I lived in Colorado, there were so many places I could go where I'd put skins on at the car and I would climb 2,000-3,000 feet up with very little flat to deal with, and then ski all the way back to the car doing turns. But here, a lot of the places we ski out to get to where we can climb things to turn, it's a slog. And you don't want to be slogging with something that won't glide. So I only use this kind of gear usually when I'm climbing up from Dutchman Flats, Dutchman Snow Park to the top of Tumalo, or from Vista Snow Park to the top of Vista Butte, because there's not a lot of distance to cover and I'm just climbing. So the skins really help you climb. But
So
we'll
let's
get into the
do
skin
some
thing.
terminology. We're going to define some different parts of the ski. Okay. This is the tip. That makes sense, right? That down there is the tail. That makes sense. This is called, without a binding on it, it would probably be a little bit more obvious. This is called the waist. Tip, tail, waist. Okay. Again, ski dimensions, and they're often given on the ski itself. So if you look at that, they're side cut. Back in the day, they were straight as an arrow. There was no side cut. Alpine skis, Nordic skis, none of them, they were just straight, right? And then they came up with a side cut, especially for carving turns, because side cut skis turn a lot better. And they figured out that it actually worked really well in Nordic as well. Okay?
This is an example of a straight, like virtually
No
very
side cut.
little side cut, just a
Old
few
school.
millimeters side cut,
Yeah.
which makes them track better.
The other
a
thing
straight
I want
line.
to talk about is camber. And we kind of touched on that a little bit, but see how those skis are poking themselves away from each other in that mid-waist section? That's camber. And he already kind of touched on alpine versus Nordic camber. And then there's also, to confuse the issue, this ski on your left, the green one, the green one, is a double camber Nordic ski. Okay? Alpine skis have a little bit of camber. Some modern skis don't really have an alpine camber at all, but way less camber. See the difference between these two setups? Pretty big, right? This ski is a 112, this ski is a 109. They're basically sort of designed to do the same thing. But notice when I pinch these, can someone describe what you're seeing? It's much harder to pinch because this is a double camber and it's a stiffer camber. Okay, even though these skis are really designed to do more or less the same thing, they are not the same ski. So the green ski, my 112s, I ski when I'm just wanting to go out and tour mostly, but I want a good stable ski for touring. My Madchus Anims, they turn better. They definitely turn better because they have less camber. Part of that is binding, which we'll talk about.
Well, what he's talking about is, I'll show you on an alpine ski here. If you flex the ski as you would through a turn, you can see the smooth arc that you get from tip to tail. So it's arced out. If you get an interruption of that arcing by virtue of a ski that's really stiff in the midsection, underfoot, like the green Fishers, that double camber, it makes them more difficult to turn. You got to use more oomph to get them into a turn. They're just less inclined to do so. Alpine attributes are about turning. Nordic, generally speaking, is about touring, about, like I said, straight line stuff.
Yeah, so I'll ski these two skis on different days, these two skis, even though they're very similar, I'll ski them on different days. Because the other thing I want you to look at, they're both 3-pin bindings, so we'll talk a little bit about bindings now. They're both a 3-pin cable binding. The 3-pin refers to the 3 pins that are poking up. There's holes on the bottom of the boot that correlate. So that's a 3-pin system. You may hear these referred to as 75 millimeter that is this distance right here. That's what 75 millimeter comes from. So when we say 75 millimeter and 3-pin, that's the same thing, just different terminology. But this has a softer cable to it, and this is called a hard wire, which is definitely a much more stiff cable than the soft cable. Now, both of these are removable. So there are days when I pop the cable off altogether and ski it just like that. It's lighter. Sometimes I'll have this in my pack. So if I'm out skiing and I say I'm going to go down Todd Ridge, I'll throw these on. Okay.
What does that do?
What does it do? Great question.
Perfect question.
Really good question, because it does a lot. And we will demonstrate what it does. So, I brought the right boot. Who knows? All right, so the 3 pins just engaged with the 3 holes on the bottom. And then this is called the bail, and you clamp the bail down.
3 holes.
Okay? So, what does it do? I'm kicking and gliding. Look at how much range of motion I have. Can everybody see that?
Put the tail on the table.
Sure. Look at the range of motion I got. That's pretty big range of motion, right? Okay. Which is kind of what you want, especially if you're on sort of flatter terrain. The more activity the heel has, you're going to get a better kick. If I can't lift my heel up, and that's why you see alpine skiers doing this at the lift lines, because they can't lift their heels. The more I can lift my heel up, the better kick I'm going to get. The better kick I'm going to get, what else am I going to get? A better glide, right, okay? So, and then you can see that there's a certain amount of torsional stiffness in the boot. But let's watch what happens when we engage the cable. See the difference? Huge difference, right? So, not going to kick as well, but what is it going to do better? It's going to turn better and generally be significantly more stable. Significantly more stable, because I'm clamped in back here, so there's no way that doesn't add a lot. And that's one of the reasons I personally still like the 75 millimeter binding. There are other binding choices out there. He'll point out some, but I still really like the 75 millimeter binding because of the versatility, right? So versatility, here's my versatility options. Cable's on, cable off. 2 choices right there, okay? 1 boot, fabric, leather, no support up top, with the exception of this carbon cuff. 1 boot. 2 boots, a leather boot, significantly more stable. Is it heavier? Yes, it's definitely heavier. But there are days when I want that. That's choice 2. Choice 3, a plastic boot. So how many choices was that? Cable on, cable off, 3 different boots. That's a lot of choices. And trust me when I say it affects how the ski skis. It definitively affects how the ski skis. So I'm still a huge fan of that. And then we talked about this ski, and it looks a lot like the cable binding, but the difference is it's a hard wire. The springs are back here, so you can tell that that's going to add even more stiffness and more lateral stability to the ski. The other thing that you'll note is the mounting. This is mounted flush on the ski, and this is mounted with a spacer underneath the heel and underneath the toe bail, or the primary part of the binding. What would that do to a ski? Bringing the binding off of the ski, what would that do to the ski? I can get way more torque on the binding are on the edge of the ski because of that elevation.
Is it harder to balance though?
No, you don't even notice it. No, you don't really notice it. But definitely you can get on edge much better because of physics. You didn't think you would come to a physics class, did you? So, you know, again, this is a little heavier duty. So I ski this like if I'm going to go ski a ski. How many people have ever done this ski? I bet nobody. Circumnavigation around Herrick and Hoodoo Buttes. Great ski. One of my favorites. So I ski that ski on that day. Okay. The only other one that I'll point out is the newest system, which is called the Rockefeller Explorer, which is a great binding choice. I think it works really well. One, because it's super easy to use. Boom. You just step into it, and it's sort of the reverse of an alpine touring setup. Alpine touring setup, the pins are on the binding and the holes are on the boots. This is the opposite of that, which is how they get around patents. But it just steps in like that, and then to release it, you just press down like that.
It's kind of a modification of the
Dina
tech binding that you see on
Yeah.
on my alpine touring skis, except it's in reverse, where the ball is on the boot
Yeah.
instead of the binding, and so male, female versus the reverse.
Now, there are definitely different boots that you can buy, but the only thing that you can change, which is different than an NBC binding, there's not a lot that you can do. But on this particular binding, there's a little push button right here, and that releases this whole bumper system. And you can buy a higher durometer bumper system. Okay, so there's a higher durometer bumper system, also known as a HDBS, high definition bullshit.
Why would you do that?
So the reason you would do that is because if you put in a stiffer bumper, you could light telemark in the ski. Right? If you're getting too much lift because of non-resistance of that bumper, it's going to be really hard to execute, a backcountry telemark turn. But if you had a higher durometer bumper, then you probably could. Or someone that is heavier, and this isn't quite right for their kick and glide, it's very, very easy to change that. I mean, like literally you could do it on the fly.
You can also lock the back in that, right?
No, you cannot.
What you're seeing there is a heel
This is a
elevator.
heel lift.
When I was,
That's all that is a heel lift. So if you're going uphill a lot of these binding systems will have a heel lift. Okay.
So are these telemark skis or these?
This is a backcountry Nordic ski. We don't have
Let's back up a little bit on the skis, because we haven't talked about width. We talked about camber.
Yep.
And we talked about bottom flex. Nordic bottom camber flex doesn't facilitate turning as easily. Alpine bottom camber does. But let's talk a little bit about width. So narrower Nordic, wider, more alpine. Alpine, generally you can think of alpine meaning for steeper up and down, okay? Nordic doesn't necessarily apply because the telemark turn came from the Scandinavian countries and Norway, and it has evolved into a turn that can be taken down. I've gone down couloirs with it. So it's kind of a misnomer, but generally speaking, you can think of Nordic as cross country and alpine as downhill. So width, let's talk about width for a little bit. So a narrower ski, this is her ski, not mine. The narrower ski is a better choice for trails that have less elevation differential, let's say, where you're on flatter to rolling terrain, and you want to optimize your efficiency going on the track. One of the things that I notice with, this is kind of one of my go-to skis, because I generally like to go to places where I'm touring, because I enjoy the kicking and gliding, and I also enjoy doing short runs. Like if we go out to Big Meadow, there's a number of glades that I'll do a quick run up, like 200-300 feet, and I'll ski powder coming down that nobody else ever goes there. And I like the wider ski to give me control on the downhill. But the other aspect of getting a wider ski is the wider the ski, the more flotation you have. So it's just like, how many people here snowshoe? Okay, so you know those really little...
How many people here do everything there is to do?
So the really little running snowshoes, if you ever have tried to break trail in those, you're still post-holing. You need like a big, long Alaskan snowshoe where like what she had when she was growing up in the bush in Alaska. Otherwise, you'll sink down. So flotation means more efficiency when you're breaking trail. And when I look at the tour I'm going to do, and I look at the weather, and I look at Mount Bachelor, how much snow have they gotten, the NOAA report, then I can evaluate, which skis do I want to take? Do I want to bring something that's narrower? And you don't see a lot of difference between these two, but I feel quite a bit of difference. If I'm going to be doing more touring than turning, generally I'll bring my Mad Shoes, which are it's the older version of what he's got there with the cables. But let's talk about weight a little bit too, because normally a narrower ski...
There's the trade-off.
Yes, a narrower ski is going to be lighter, less mass. There's less to it. Not always, but it's narrower. It slides in the track better. One of the downsides, and I like to talk about pros and cons of things, because nothing's perfect. I'm going to make an analogy for ski quiver to canoes. When I was canoe tripping, and I was doing a lot of it, I got so into it that I had 9 solo and tandem carbon fiber and Kevlar canoes.
And plus one.
Because they all did different things. But if I was not a really avid canoeist, and I was like, yeah, one boat, that's fine, right? But the more you get into it, the more you get obsessive, like Woody and I are, about we need 10 different skis to do everything we want to do.
Minimum.
Exactly. But the width will help you float more so you're not breaking trail. I mean, when you've skied with a group like the Nordic Club group and somebody's brought really narrow light touring skis and they're at the head of the group doing their breaking, man, they're going 3 times deeper than we will with these things. So I want to make some comments about bindings. Generally Woody and I agree on everything, and I'm fine with whatever he wants to do, but I've got this same volet binding and I've got these same cables, never used them. You know why? Because I hate messing around with stuff. And it's one of the reasons why I don't use, for a lot of tours, unless it's just steep up, tumble and coming down, I don't use the alpine touring skis as much. It's called transitioning. When you have to transition from climbing with an alpine touring ski, you've got to take your skins off, okay? And then you've got to take your foot out of the binding. And when it was deep snow up at Vista Butte the other day, I took my foot off of one of the binding and went, whoa, all the way up to my crotch because the snow was so deep. I post-holed down and I was like, okay, so I got to balance on one foot, take the skin off, put my ski back on. But to switch from touring mode to downhill mode, I have to turn the binding, I have to lock the ski brake down, and I have to turn it. And I don't mean to turn you guys off to alpine touring if you ever feel the impulse to do it, because it's awesome for the right terrain, okay? I use them a lot for the right terrain. But I see people going to the Nordic Center with setups like this with skins on to go out to Todd Lake, and I'm like, dude, really? What the hell, man? It's like...
That's the one clever skier right there.
So anyways, yeah, so you got to take your foot out, then you got to switch it around. And so that's the transitioning. That the thing that I love about freeheel is the ability to just, if I have skins on, I can reach down, rip my skin off, I'll drop my ski pole down for the descent, and I'm ready to go. No messing around. But one of the differences that Woody and I have is this is the same binding as that. I have those cables, but I just don't want to take the time to do it. And if you have a lighter boot like this, as opposed to this, it really does make sense to do it, to put them on, because if you if you need the control, and maybe not all of you are going to be skiing in places where it's going to be steep enough or challenging enough to do that. But if you move in that direction, it's really important to have the most control you can get through the interface between your foot and ankle and leg and the ski is your boot binding combination. And we were going to talk about a little bit about, Woody mentioned the Explorer binding. I don't have any experience with it. Pro on that, incredibly light,
Very light.
better control for turning, more range of motion, I think, than in an NBC. So those are the pros. The con is, I'm cheap. $250 for a cross-country binding, I'm too cheap for that. So the NBCs are less expensive. They use, show them the little bar there. It attaches by a bar. And normally I like bars, but in this case, I think the Explorer is a better choice.
So I wanted to demonstrate, there's really good article. This binding's only been out for maybe 2 years, and there's more and more people that are making different boots for it. But there's a really good article, and I can't remember if it's on Earn Your Turns or some other place, but they talked about stiffness difference between the NNNBC and the new Explorer binding. And it comes down to a very simple thing. Again, physics. So the difference between the NNN and the NNNBC, which stands for backcountry, the difference is two things. One, the length and the diameter of the bar. So if you got a larger diameter and something clamped around that diameter and it's slightly wider, then necessarily it makes sense from a physics standpoint that it's going to be more secure and give you more torque, right? The new Explorer binding, this is a bar that is within the inside edges of the boot. Got it? See what I'm talking about? Whereas the new Explorer binding is on the outside of the boot. Therefore, the interface is about 5 millimeters difference. And being 5 millimeters wider, what does that tell us? It's more stable. It's going to be more stable. So that's one big difference between the old, the newest and the NNNBC.
Question. So, what about the width of the Explorer compared to the more traditional?
It's not as wide. It's not as wide.
Which is an advantage. Like the other day, I was skiing out to Todd Lake with this setup. And one of the downsides of the 3-pin, the 75 millimeter setup, is that if people with skinny skis preceded you and then the trail gets real hard, then these things grind on the side of the track.
Good time to step out.
Those darn skinny skiers, I mean, come on, man.
The other big difference is the 75 millimeter binding is distinctively, definitely wider in its contact patch. But the other thing is, again, that is only connected by those pins. So you can see, depending on the stiffness of the boot, and obviously there's a lot of different boot manufacturers, but you can see how that rubber bumper is engaging, right? Again, if I put a higher durometer bumper there, which is very easy to change out, I could get even more resistance. Or if you were just flat skiing, you could take that out, put it in your pack, and it's going to act more like an AT binding, which has zero resistance. Okay, but that is only connected like that.
That stiffer bumper is what he's talking about. Is really the biggest asset in that is for doing telemark turns, because when you're skiing freeheel parallel, and contrary to what a lot of people think, it's like, oh, you can't ski parallel on freeheel gear. It's like, yes, you can. You just stand on your feet. You don't need your heel locked to do wedge turns, stem Christies, and parallel turns. I do it all the time, and I teach people that in addition to the telemark turn, and we'll get into the turning stuff because Woody and I are going to be doing a cross-country downhill class in February at Hoodoo, and then that will be followed by an actual telemark class. It'll be more advanced terrain gear and turning techniques. So yeah.
So I wanted to talk about interface of boot and binding. Everybody can clearly see that the bail of the binding is not engaged, right? But is there another form of engagement
This is
between
the bail.
between the boot and the binding? Yeah, there's 3 pins and 3 holes, so that's one form of engagement. But then also the side walls of the 75 millimeter binding. So right now it's not engaged, but look, right? Whereas any other form of binding it's just gonna come out. So there's a lot of forms of engagement. And then again, if I'm running the cable, and sometimes I run the cable like that, skiing along, and then I come to a place that I want to click it down, and then I do that. And then again, sometimes I ski with the cables in my pack.
Here's another. Sorry.
Tell people why they would want to click it down. What sort of slope, what sort of situation?
It definitely gives you more control over the ski. Okay?
Here's another little thing of why that cable helps, even though I'm too lazy to do it. See how much?
Yeah.
See that? If you have the cable on, you don't get that little bit of slop,
Yeah.
which
So
doesn't make a huge difference, but it does make a difference.
So
I would want to click it down if I'm going down a steeper slope. Is that correct?
I ski this ski with the cable binding. I skied this the other day, and I was in the cable 100% of the time because the cable adds so much more to this lighter boot. You know, as compared to this boot, if I was skiing with this boot, I probably would not engage the cable. I probably wouldn't even carry the cable because this boot is making up for a lot. So another besides the kicking and gliding, if you've been for a ski with me, the likelihood of having to sidestep somewhere because we're going to go down something that's kind of steep because I don't really know where I am and I'm trying to figure out where I am. The more that you're secure on your ski, you're going to be able to sidestep a lot better. If your boot and binding combo is just kind of flopping around, it really is hard to really maneuver that ski in a sidestep. Whereas if it's like this, I can sidestep like crazy. Does that make sense? So
Your
it's not-
tail is less likely to get caught.
your tail is left. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's not just about kicking and gliding. It's also about, okay, now I'm doing a step turn. How many people know what a step turn is? If you don't, you need to come to our actual clinic because that's the most effective turn that we have. And if the more that I'm secure with my boot and binding combo, when I step out of a track because I want to slow down because I'm going too fast because of the icy track he was talking about earlier, the better binding boot interface that I have, I'm going to be able to step out of that track better, or just I need to change directions because the trail is turning. Again, we're not on roads, we're on single track. A lot of what we ski in the backcountry are really mountain bike trails in the summer. And in mountain biking, do we like swoopy doopies?
Woody,
I'm a trail designer.
I want to talk a little bit about weight because up until, well, weight's a big thing, okay? It's just like, you know, hiking boots have gone from when I started hiking and you started hiking, they were leather hiking boots that weighed like 4 pounds each, right? With a steel shank and a heavy Vibram sole.
Little
and
weight
now,
welt.
now most people that hike the PCT use Ultras or something like these that weigh nothing.
I can't imagine hiking in a boot like that now.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, same here.
Can't,
They
right?
used to say 1 pound on the foot is equal to 5 pounds on the back.
Yeah.
And so, yes, weight is a factor. And this is just my experience that I'm going to relate. And when I'm doing a tour where there's not a lot of turning involved, yeah, I'll use narrower, lighter gear. I'll use I'll use this lighter boot. This is my lightest boot right now. And I can use these on edgeless, ancient Apoki, no-wax Nordic skis that are very narrow, light touring skis. So I'll sometimes use that. But what I've found is that when I'm skiing with a Nordic club with people of like equal fitness level, unless I'm going like out to Crater Ditch, out to Broken Top, which is, what is that? you guys? It's like 13 miles.
That's about a
or
12-mile. Yeah.
something like that.
Yep.
Unless I'm
That's a
going
long ski.
really long distance, the weight doesn't make all that much difference. So it's this range of, once again, this spectrum of pro and con. The more downhill or alpine oriented your setup is, and this is the setup that I use for a lot of stuff, unless it's just like, it's pretty flat terrain. I'm not gonna haul this around. But I find that essentially, if I'm skiing with somebody like Woody and he's got gear that weighs 3 pounds less than my total setup, it really isn't that much difference. At the end of the day, we're both like, yeah, I'm kind of tired. Yeah. We both go about the same speed. Yeah, about the same, pace. When I'm climbing a lot, like when I'm climbing Tumalo, I can definitely feel a difference between a light setup and a heavy setup. The interesting thing is that one of the reasons that I'm going to go back to alpine touring for just a moment. One of the reasons it's got so incredibly popular is the elements that you're able to get in an alpine touring ski for turning, for climbing and descending, have gotten so light. Whereas alpine touring randonnée used to be heavier, and that's the reason everybody was freeheel. Now it's switched.
Yeah.
And so alpine touring has gotten incredibly popular over the past few years. Like when we moved to Bend in 2010, we used to climb up. We would go before we would open our bike shop in the morning. We would ski to the top of Vista Butte for a quick workout, and nobody would be up there. Now when I go up there, it's hard to find an untracked line to ski down. But the weight does make a difference when you're climbing a lot. But when you're doing a lot of the tours that you guys will probably be engaging in, don't think too much about the weight. Think more about the support you're going to get.
Yes.
Alpine touring stuff has gotten so light that this setup, these skis, these bindings, and these boots weigh about the same as my Nordic setup.
Yep.
But they release, which is nice because when I'm skiing really difficult conditions, and Woody's got some freeheel gear that releases, don't you? You have some 75 millimeter releasable bindings.
Yep.
The difference is these bindings weigh a fraction of what those weigh. So for climbing, it makes a big difference. For safety's sake, because I'm now 72, I don't want to tear my ACL, and I've never, knock on plastic, I've never, out of all the years I've been doing this, I've never hurt myself skiing freeheel, because you do have a vertical release. Always, because your heel is not locked down. But the minute you lock your heel down, you want to have a release. Because if you don't and you fall, that ski can do nasty things to your anatomy. So,
Leverage.
yes.
Yeah.
So
definitely
one of the
leverage.
things, before I forget, this is a little weird. Just the one new pair of skis that I got this year, because I've been wanting to do this for years, is I wanted to get.
That's a funky setup.
It's a funky setup. It's kind of a hybrid setup because I love doing both. I love freeheel. I love telemark setups. I love alpine touring. But like I said, alpine touring skis with skins just suck. Whereas the no-wax bases allow you to kick and glide, and you're not having to take the skins off and deal with all that mess. So I put a pair of alpine touring bindings on a pair of they're slightly wider than Woody's. Are those Anims or are those?
Anims.
Okay, so it's the same ski.
109s.
Yeah. They're still not quite as, they don't turn, I've used them in breakable crust, and they're okay. They're just not, these are the best breakable crust skis I've ever skied for control in really difficult snow. But I'm playing with this, and so far I'm kind of, it's okay. I'll use them for some things where I have to do a long approach, but I want to bring my alpine touring gear, and I don't want to mess around with skins. So.
Ski control. Go ahead.
Was that a runaway cable?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, a ski leash,
Leash.
because these skis have brakes, which I hate. I got to put leashes on these because the brakes. We were skiing at Hoodoo last year, and I had alpine touring skis on with brakes. And what's that name of that? Freaky Freddy. I had a binding release on a Black Diamond run, and I had ski brakes on them, and I'm like, My ski took off. It's like I could have killed a child. But the ski brake was deployed. It just didn't stop the ski. So it's like, nah, I like leashes. You know they're going to stay on your feet.
Well, too, if you're skiing powder in the backcountry,
You lose your ski, you lose your ski.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to point out, again, these two skis are extremely similar, kind of for the same thing. This ski is definitely heavier in weight, and that's one of the reasons that it turns better. This ski tours better because it's a little bit lighter weight. You can see that somewhat in the thickness of the ski, but it also has to do with the layup and what kind of wood they're using in there. Okay. Let's
So where
let's
are we
talk
at
about
now?
other gear.
Let's talk about poles. And we're not talking about the Slavic country. We're people from Slavic countries. We're talking about the things you put on your hands to go cross-country skiing. So if you are doing backcountry skiing, you can use standard cross-country poles. Usually the baskets
You'll be
may
like
be
this.
appropriate. Yeah. So this is the height that, well, that's a little too high for my normal Nordic height. So this is the old rule. Sizing for Nordic skiing, cross-country skiing, you want to be able to fit it under your arm like this, okay? And the reason for that is you get, I mean, your legs are part of your motor. These are also part of your motor, okay? So it's a four-cylinder engine you're running on. And so you can get full extension, you can get a longer push with a longer pole, and that's the reason why with cross-country poles, they're this long. The downside for backcountry is if you are skiing like it has been, where the track is down here, and it's buried this far deep alongside the snow, and you've got poles at your cross-country length, then you're like an orangutan. You're like, ooh, ooh, ooh. And so you can adjust the length relative to what it needs to be. If you're doing a long traverse, then you can put your downhill pole longer and your uphill pole shorter, so you're not like this.
Or you could grab the pole here. A lot of
Yeah.
touring poles have an
Yeah,
extended
they've got a little
grip.
thing here.
Yeah.
One other thing, just before it popped into my head, just before we get completely, we won't leave the poles, but the whole idea of using putting the cables on and off, I think Woody would agree that if you've got a long downhill that you're dealing with, it's worth doing it. But if you've got a little short downhill,
Yeah.
like going to Todd Lake, it's like, don't do that.
Yeah.
You're not going to be happy doing that. So, yeah.
Good.
So having adjustable length for the downhill part, like I'll adjust my pole for the touring part. Usually when I'm climbing up something steep and it's not too deep along the side, I'll have it at about 10 centimeters shorter than my Nordic. Yeah.
Can you put snow baskets on regular adjustable hiking poles?
Yes.
Yes.
The problem, like I've got 3 pair of hiking poles. None of them go long enough for me. I don't know how tall you are because I can't tell, but they may be just long enough for the cross-country length. But that's something to be aware of, is that generally hiking poles, they don't make them really long, and that's because a lot of people don't know how to use hiking poles. I see them on
Starting
the
with
trail
how to
and
use the grip.
they're doing this like this. It's like, no, you're not using them right, dude. The other most important thing with the pole is to use the grip properly. And if you do any lessons with us,
And the strap.
yes, the strap is there not to just like a safety leash. It's there because when the strap is adjusted properly, you don't grip the pole. Because if you're skiing and you're gripping the pole and you're pushing, I can only push to my hip plane. I can't go any further. But if you're holding the pole between your thumb and your forefinger, letting it pivot like this, using the strap as a brace, you've got that purchase so that you can push all you want without using any energy from your hand to grip it. It encourages you to, we go into this in the lessons, it encourages you when you're polling to not arm, you don't want to arm pull. You don't want to be, you're going to wear your arms out. So your more powerful muscles are here. And you want to be able to push from there. Very little arm bend. Most of the push is coming from the shoulder muscles. Okay, but you've got to have proper use of the pole strap to do so. So the last thing I want to say about the poles is when I get ready to I don't do it for a short downhill because it's not worth messing around with it. So I drop it down to about 125 centimeters because when you're going downhill, you want the general rule with an alpine pole for your alpine skiers, you want your forearm with the pole in the ground or in the snow, you want your pole basically parallel with the snow. Okay? What do you want to say about poles? Something about baskets, right? Say something about baskets.
I mean, there's different kinds of baskets. He's got a static basket. I've got a dynamic basket. Does it make a difference? Not.
I want dynamic
Really?
baskets.
Do I
I
notice it's
didn't know about those. I want them now.
The other thing, kind of the biggest difference in poles when you're shopping poles, again, making sure that you're getting something that's long enough. I prefer a 2-piece pole as over a 3-piece pole just because it's simpler. I don't have to do the math on what that size is the bottom versus the top. And then the other big difference is going to be in carbon fiber versus aluminum. Carbon poles are going to be lighter, just like hiking poles. Same thing there. Can they be more brittle? I've never broken a carbon fiber pole as of yet. Could happen tomorrow.
I just thought of something else about boots that I want to say. I want to back up to boots for just a minute. Is everybody okay with that? Okay. So this, like I said, this boot and this ski is kind of my go-to setup when I'm skiing more difficult trails or skiing something to go, that I can do. Well, I call it touring for turns, okay?
Farm and turns.
And so it's a plastic boot. Yes, it weighs more than the NNNBCs, but it's like Way's been saying, it's 3-pin. So the advantage of this for me is I used to use these almost exclusively. I had the plastic boots, but I use these probably 80% of the time. What I found for me is, and this gets back to me being cheap, basically. I tear the inside fabric out because the sole is so stiff. And I would do a lot of telemarking and a lot of touring, and I would tear the fabric out of it, okay? And I was getting pretty good control. I used to have NNNBC bindings on these skis, but I switched out because I got tired of buying $300 boots every year. So I got these used at Gear Fix for $100. They're slightly heavier. I weighed the difference. It's a difference of about 8 or 9 ounces total. And the other difference is I skied with these. The first trip I did with the Nordic Club this year, we went out, did Todd Lake, Todd Ridge, Big Meadow. My feet got cold in these. I never get cold or wet feet in these, okay? And these will last. I will pass them down to my grandchildren because that's how long they'll last.
I skied with a guy today telemarking at Mount Bachelor, and he was skiing in a 30-year-old boot. And he was skiing a lot. I mean, he's a good skier. So, yeah. Let's move on to other gear. Everybody good on skis and bindings?
I have a question to ask you. So
Yep.
for somebody first time backcountry touring, no setup, what width of ski would you recommend? Binding and type of boot. Just like first introductory set.
Can I answer that and then
Yeah.
you? Okay. It depends on how far you want to go with it. If you're really athletic and you're like, yes, I want to ski things like Vista Butte and do the turning stuff, okay? Then, geez, go with this
Go
setup.
big.
Go big or go home. If you're like, I'm fine with the green and the blue trails, which can, in certain conditions, can turn into black, right? Because it depends on what the weather's doing and what the snow's doing. But the stiffer the gear, the more comfortable you, and to a certain degree, safer you'll be because you just have more control. I've noticed the trajectory of the equipment that people in the Nordic Club use and people in general. When I look at what other people got, and I'm going up to Swampy or even the Nordic Center, the evolution of when we first got here 15 years ago, almost everybody in the Nordic club except us we were using these, and you'd never see anybody on that hardly, except for Paul. I think you got to it really quick, but a lot of people were using really narrow
65,
edgeless
70.
or very narrow edge skis. And now you see everybody out there, almost everybody's got at least the Madshus M68s, 68 at the waist. They're 99 at the tip or
99.
something like that.
Yep. they're 99.
So, yeah,
So
just
maybe, when you talk about that, maybe you could say for these people, if you're gonna be skiing, maybe just out to Swampy Shelter, or maybe to Swede, and that's pretty much then I would suggest kind of this level,
yeah.
because there are a lot of newbies here that need some, basic advice, and they have in their mind. I think it would help them if you did kind of the shelter names and whatever to help them visualize what sort of trail they.
So I'll answer it this way. If you're going to ski Meisner 50% of your time, and 50% of your time you want to ski Swampy, these are known entities that we know, that's a different ski, right? And that ski probably is they groom at 70, so your ski's got to be 68. Otherwise, it's not going to fit in the track. So if that's what you want to do, that's the range that you're looking at. If you're going to say, I only ski at Meisner when the snow everywhere else is not that great, and I'm going to go do a simple tour, I'm not going to ski in the tracks, but I'm going to go ski Meisner, that's a different ski. That's probably, we skied with 6 people the other day, and I think 2 of us were on 88s, and everybody else was on 98s.
And you were off the trail.
And we were off trail 80% of the time.
If you're not doing off trail,
yeah,
and you want something like one setup, I don't want all the skis that Mark and Woody had. I want one pair of skis that I can kind of do everything with. I'm not going to be skiing uber steep terrain. Then getting something about this width with NNNBCs. Well, these are 73, but you can go a little narrower. My experience is, they say that's the width, but you can fit.
It wallers out.
This is a few millimeters. There's no tip patrol out going, your tips are too wide, you're out of here.
I'll also answer the question in this way. So I brought this, I actually had to borrow this boot because my wife was out skiing today. This is her ski. She's got several pairs of skis with the same binding. She only uses one boot. But at Pine Mountain Sports, you can rent this binding. They're the only ones that rent this binding and boot combo, and they have it on 100 skis, they have it on a 112 ski, and they also have it on a 125 ski. So,
which I think is too wide for that system, but that's just that's speaking out my left ear because I haven't used it. Because it's you've got to have enough oomph from the boot and the binding to drive a wider ski. And I've tried putting floppier boots. Admittedly, they were not as stiff 3-pin 75 millimeter boots on a pretty wide ski, like as wide as these. And it worked fine as long as the snow was soft. But once you get on really packed, like on a trail that somebody's snow plowed down, and it's fast and narrow, it's hard to even get it up on edge in a wedge, let alone do parallel telly turns, because you got to have enough oomph to get it rotated up onto the edge.
The boot has to match with the binding and the ski. Okay, so if I'm looking at plastic, hey, thumbs up, thumbs up. That combo, no, it's too much boot for that particular ski. Even though the binding is the same as this, but the ski, that's not going to work. So conversely, though, that works. That is on the edge. I usually prefer to go with my leather when I'm skiing that particular ski, or my plastic. That just doesn't work at all, right? That's not a good combination.
And keep in mind that a lot of shop people, REI, aren't really qualified to sell you the equipment that should be matched with each other. I mean, there's Peggy's at REI, and she's really knowledgeable, but I don't know if she's there this year. But yeah, so just be aware that you may or may not get somebody that really knows what they're talking about.
So, just before you go on to other equipment, say I'm a person and I wanna go to a used shop, one of the three. Is there anything I should stay away from, or is there things that you would point to people with used equipment?
Watch out for pinholes that are torn out. A lot of times they'll tear from the pinhole to the front of the boot. If they're really beat up, don't get it. But I can tell you, last time I was at Second Wind, if you're the right size, there are a number of boots like this for stupid cheap prices. Like you don't have any, the most popular plastic boot, the only one that's
T4.
made anymore is the Scarpa T4. That's very much like this, about the same, slightly heavier by a couple ounces. The only shop that I know of in town is Mountain Supply, right?
Yes, that's how the brand is.
Mountain Supply, Travis at Mountain Supply, he's the best tech in town, and he is probably one of the most knowledgeable salesmen because he is a very avid backcountry skier for both alpine touring and freeheel stuff. So, but the ones that I've seen when you were over at Second Wind, I mean, they had the plastic number of like old Scarpa T3s that are like the new T4s for $48 because the new T4s are $460. Like I said, I'm cheap, man. I bought these for $100 years ago, and I'm still using them.
The other thing that I would look for is look at the edges, metal edges of the ski. If there's a lot of rust on them, start to raise some flags. That being said, I was given a pair of Telly skis, and they were full rust. I mean, they'd been in a barn for a long time, stone grinding, put a tune-up on them, and they look brand new. So there's something you could do, especially if it doesn't have this. But look at the edges, feel the edges. Are there rough spots along the edges? You know, it might not have rust on it, but it might have a lot of burrs on it. Not as likely on a Nordic ski as, say, a telemark ski or an alpine ski. The other thing that I would look for is, is the binding functional? Is it actually doing what it's supposed to do? And then feel the kick pattern, right? Over time, hundreds of miles, what's going to happen to our kick pattern? It just is going to wear down, for sure. So run your fingernail up and down it, right? And just feel it. And if there's another pair of skis that's right there, compare the two. And I can tell you, in these two skis, again, these two skis are pretty doggone similar. Fisher, in my opinion, has the best kick pattern. That has much better climbing ability and kicking pattern. This ski, you might see a little bit of funky stuff on it. From time to time, I do have to put a kicker wax on the tips and the tails of this ski. Without it, I would get some slip. But on this ski, I never have.
Yeah, Laura.
I wanted to bring up, especially for people that are interested, who in town rents different versions of backcountry skis for people to try.
Pine Mountain Sports.
Pine Mountain does.
Mountain Supply does.
And Mountain Supply does, yeah. And REI does that. Do they
I don't think
anymore?
so.
They used to.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they both have a variety, so you can try some stuff.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, because trying, and I don't know about Mountain Supply, but I know Pine Mountain Sports. If you go in and you rent a ski, I'm pretty sure that they will apply that rental price to you purchasing. So, yep.
What is kicker wax?
Kicker wax is...
That's what you use if you live in Colorado. Because the
That's a good
temperatures are all below
transmission.
10 degrees. So
Let's
here,
see.
we have such temperature variation that we go with the no wax bases. But kicker wax does the same thing that a no wax base does. It means it's no wax because you don't have to wax it. That being said, in the conditions that we have around here, constantly, you get new snow, it's really nice skiing, and then the sun comes out and gets on the track, and all of a sudden you've got snow stuck to your bases, and you've got to use some sort of glide wax, like, I'll show you. This is the best stuff. It's a glide wax.
Made in Bend.
It's made in Bend. It's better than I've used F4, which is like a liquid. It doesn't last as long. This is more of a paste, and it comes with its own very own maxi pad. So that's really nice.
So kicker
Maxi,
wax.
maxi glide. It's got its maxi pad.
Kicker wax is what we did before waxless skis. Is we waxed our skis, and the problem with waxing your skis is there's a real science to this. And if you get the wrong wax, it doesn't work very well. And you have to know which wax you can use when, according to the snow crystals that you're skiing on.
And the temperature.
And the temperature. And
Which
you
can
have to know
change from moment to moment.
which
here in the
wax
Cascades.
will go on top of which wax. Because one way it doesn't work very well, the other way it works well. So this comes in a lot of different temperatures. This is just a general all-purpose wax, but like racers, they're nerdy about it. I mean, seriously nerdy about it. But I mean, basically, you just take it, and in the old days, we would wax this portion. But if you're ever slipping and you're not getting good grip, maybe the camber's too stiff, or you can.
I also carry some downhill wax that I hot wax my skis tips with and tails, and then it works pretty good, but it's harder than what Woody's got there, but it does work.
Yeah.
And there's nothing worse than having your skis stick, because then you can't glide. You're just stuck. You're like, yeah.
So let's talk about what's in our packs, because this is. I mean, we could talk about this stuff for 3 more hours.
Yeah,
but
well,
we need to
we're
move
done
on.
with that.
you
We're
guys-
done with that.
And we're watching the clock. Yeah. So
Yeah,
so
we
what's
got
in
half
my
hour.
pack? A pack cover, a repair kit, because somebody's Riva bindings are going to break. We're not going to mention who. A pack cover. Pack cover. I mean, if it's blue sky when I leave, no, I'm not going to carry this. But I pretty much always do carry a pack cover.
Wet snow can kind of get inside your zippers and
Yeah.
make a mess.
My repair kit includes a number of different tools for if I have to repair a binding. And I've had to repair bindings out in the woods for sure. So my repair kit is there. I have not only a kicker wax, but I have glide wax that he was talking about, because
You didn't tell us what your tools were in your repair kit.
Leatherman.
there are a number of different. I know what
Screwdriver.
screws are on bindings, and I've got that, and then of course the handy dandy, multi-tool. Yep.
Are you actually carrying extra screws and parts for your bindings in your repair kit so you can repair it?
It depends on the bind. There were companies that made they called it a backcountry repair kit for a specific binding. Do I carry a repair kit for every binding? No, I don't. There's very little that can go wrong with this binding. But there are other bindings out there that definitely there are things that could go wrong. But this
That being
binding,
said, I have twice, because these skis are like 15 years old, and I've skied hundreds of miles with them. I've broken the head off of the posi drive screw in the front of the 3 retention screws, and I'm glad I noticed it before I went out that day. So always kind of just check your gear before you go is kind of the moral of that story.
I've got a little cloth that has a little solvent on it. So let's say that, I put a kicker wax on and it really wasn't the right choice. I've got something that I can pull that off now. Okay. I don't know. I mean, these are like pre-made something or others. They're really made for cleaning your bike.
Here,
What they are.
save your cards to your motel rooms, because when you
It
get
does the same thing as this.
when I get snow glopped all over the bottom, I can just scrape it really nice with the room key.
I have a little bivvy, just in case. Very simple. It's just like the Mylar reflective blanket. But this actually is more than a blanket. It actually has a shape to it like a bivvy sack. That's what it is. I've got that in there. I have kicker skins. If you're skiing on, sort of harder, icier conditions and the grip pattern of your ski is not working, a set of kicker skins only goes on the kick pattern. It's not a full skin. It only goes on that pattern. The Fisher skis are great because they make this thing called the easy skin. And it is, as it says, it's very easy to use. It has this little guy there that comes up through and attaches there, and then the rest of it goes down with the glue that he was talking about. But those are in my pack 80% of the time. I mean, is there the occasional ski that I go on that I don't carry them? Yeah, but I
Those
almost
kicker
always
skins will
do.
only work on the Fisher, whereas
Yeah.
Black Diamond makes these kicker skins that strap on in front of your binding, and they glue on like his. But be aware that there are conditions when you'll like the NOAX bases do not work well on icy track because there's got to be enough purchase from the little scales to bite into the snow. Ice is the worst, and that's why having kicker skins is really vital sometimes. Yeah.
Are those disposable? Or are they reusable?
No,
Oh no,
reusable.
they're reusable.
Yeah.
I've been using them for years, too many times. And sometimes you can put new glue
It's a
on.
temporary glue. It's just a sticky.
Yeah.
It is a glue, but it's not. It's a removable glue. Yeah.
And the glues are made for cold temperatures, so if you put them on in room temperature and then pull them off, you'll leave
Residue.
glue on the.
You can, yeah, depending on the base.
Most likely.
But-
Another reason why I have this.
Another thing that the NOAX doesn't work great for is climbing. If you're breaking trail and trying to go up a steep hill, if it's really loose snow, the shear effect between the cold powder, if you're not packing it out, it's hard to get. It's not as bad as ice, but sometimes I'll put, for steep climbs in new powder if I'm breaking trail, I'll put the kicker skins
We skied
on.
a ski out of Willamette Pass last year, and we skied for maybe 10 minutes, and then we put our skins on, and the skins stayed on the entire rest of the ski because it was very icy. I have a fire kit. Always have a fire kit, more or less, generally speaking. I, more than not, carry a satellite communicator. If you're a backpacker, you probably are very familiar with this. If you're not a backpacker, you might be, what the heck is that? It's a very simple device. You turn it on. There's two buttons on it. One button is a check-in button, so when I'm backpacking solo, I let my wife know that I've gotten to camp just by hitting that button, right? I'm okay. And it gives her the GPS location of where I am.
And that's the Zoleo, right?
That's the Zoleo.
I've got the Garmin InReach. These both require a subscription. You can get emergency locator beacons that are made by McMurdo and ACR that don't require that, but you can't text with them.
Yeah.
So
And then, of course, it has the SOS feature. And the newer Apple phones have an SOS feature. If you're seriously going into the backcountry a lot, those of us in the know would tell you that the Apple is not there yet. I would not rely on it. That being said, have people been rescued because they use their? Yes, they have. But it's not as foolproof as this. So, one button said okay, and one button is it's not okay, right? And when you hit that button, it's going out to the satellite, it's going to the emergency response, but you also have contacts that also get a check-in that they now know that you're not okay. And they can start the communication process with the emergency. This is called Zoleo.
So I know about the Garmin. That's called
This is called a Zoleo, is the brand name.
Spot is another one.
Spot is another.
Another thing that I take because I'm
Text with that one, Woody?
Yes.
Okay.
It
it
mates
links to your
with your
phone,
phone.
right? Yeah.
What's the most user-friendly, would you say?
I had a Garmin, and I was trying to communicate with my wife on the on the Wonderland Trail last year, and I could not have been more frustrated. And I have found this one to be. I'm a geek until.
Well, I have the Garmin, and I agree with Woody. It kind of sucks. It's not user friendly, but I have it, so I'm not buying a new one. Another thing that I carry because I'm guiding trips is I'm a radio geek because I'm a ham radio operator, but you don't need a license for the family radio system, the FRS radios. So I've got a couple of waterproof radios that I'll carry one, and I'll give the other one to who's either in the lead or the rear. That being said, let's talk about safety stuff a little bit, and
Yeah,
then we'll
so-
talk about. We've only got 20 minutes.
Yeah. So food, water.
Oh yeah,
And extra clothing. So
Warm
a
gloves,
vest,
warm
a
dry
puffy. I always
spare
have
hat.
2 pair of gloves.
Yeah, me too. I have 3, and I carry a summer hat for when it really. I sweat a lot when I'm climbing stuff and the sun comes out. So I have a summer hat. I have a medium weight wool hat. I love. This is. I'm going to give a little plug for Stormy. What are they called?
Stormy
Cromer.
Daniels?
Stormy Cromer. What? I missed it. Anyways, Stormy Cromer hats. I love skiing with a hat with a visor, and it's warm and it comes down over your ears if you need it to. But I hate wearing goggles unless I absolutely need to. So when it's snowing and I'm skiing downhill fast, that visor or the sun. I also don't wear sunglasses most of the time. So I love having a visor cap. So Stormy Cromer hats, get them. They're awesome. It used to be Crowsfoot Commons had them, but now that's a shop
Beyond
called
Between Evergreens.
Between Evergreens, which reminds me, before I also forget, because we've only got 20 minutes left, I want to tell everybody that I'm doing a podcast for the Nordic Club called Between the Pines. So it's a YouTube channel and an audio podcast. We've already got 2 channels. I think Laura's going to post something on the
There'll
website.
be something in the next newsletter.
Okay. And so this will actually be posted on the YouTube channel, Between the Pines. And we'll also be doing an audio version on the audio podcast. So one's an audio podcast, the other is a video YouTube
And the
channel.
topic is?
The topic of
There'll be a number of them.
it'll be
Series.
backcountry
It's a series.
skiing. Yeah.
Yeah.
We may do some hiking stuff in the summer, but mostly it'll be about backcountry skiing for the Nordic Club.
Yeah, the last thing I want to touch on is obviously you got to have a decent sized pack to carry all of this stuff. So figure out, how much stuff are you realistically going to carry, and then figure out what size pack it's going to go in. It's, in my opinion, especially, I'm completely different backpacking. When I'm backpacking, I am an ultralighter, minimalist, as little as I can possibly carry, because I can go faster, I can go further, right? But in the wintertime, I'm the absolute opposite. So I would prefer to have a pack that's a little bit larger volume. So on the days when I need to carry a little bit more clothing for storm protection, it still can compress down. But if it's not big enough to carry that extra puffy jacket that I want to carry to cover my ass, right, then that's a problem. I'm also a big fan of pockets and easy things to reach. So I can reach, stuff here. I oftentimes put little strings, which is just a toggle. So anything that I really want, close, boom. Easy to get to. I'm a big fan of this pocket. This is where my phone goes. Right there. It's always easy. I take a lot of photographs. I've got a phone that's very easy to do photographs. But then I can keep little snacky things in there. But look at your pocket configuration. A lot of winter packs, you go in and say, hey, I'd like to look at winter packs. A lot of winter packs are not going to have side pockets. They're going to instead have straps so that you can strap your skis to your pack.
Like this. This is a Mammut pack. I recommend 30 liters
Yep.
is about the perfect size. You also want, if a pack is made for skiing, it generally is going to fit you in a way that is going to really be snug. When I'm skiing, I want my waist belt tight. I want a sternum strap here, because when you're skiing, you want the pack to move with you, not be flinging around like a old Kelty frame pack. Okay? So, yeah. So
Sorry, Dick Kelty.
They were great packs for what they are for. What's that?
You still carry duct tape?
Duct tape can
Yes.
be in your repair kit.
I carry my duct tape right here, wrapped around my pole.
Yep. Another important safety item, headlamp.
Headlamp. 10 essentials. That being said, we're down to 15 minutes. Having a urethane ski strap, volet strap, means that if you're binding craps a bed, so to speak, and starts to come off, or your boot, like I was teaching
last
with
year.
Woody last year in my old pair of Scarpa T3s, the sole separated, the Vibram pulled off, and I was like, oh, I didn't bring spare boots. But if you're in the backcountry, I was at the lodge and getting ready to go and teach with him, and so, anyways, if I was in the backcountry, if I had this strap, I can at least strap my boot to the ski and not have to call search and rescue. What's that?
Or duct tape.
Duct tape will work too, but the nice thing about this is it's flexible.
Duct tape may not stick if it's really, really cold. May not. The last thing that I have in my pack, which I typically keep in an outside pocket, is a sit pad. Why
Ooh,
would
I
I want a
like
sit
that.
pad? Because I don't want to sit in the snow. Right? One, I don't want to sit in the snow. I want something to insulate my butt when I'm sitting in the snow having my snack or my lunch. But there's one other key reason why I might want to have this. Anybody think what that might be?
Splint.
A splint. It's a great splint. Right? That with a volet strap. Okay. So I pretty much always, more often than not, I carry a 3/4 pad because I like to get comfortable at once. All right, moving
What
on.
kind of pad is that? I want one.
X-Ped.
Oh, X-Ped. Okay. Yeah, that's cool.
X-Ped.
I usually
X-Ped.
sit on
I
my
love this
pack,
one.
turn my pack upside down, and I sit on the back part, but then I smash my lunch. So there you go. So, okay, so we talked a bit about gear. Let's talk a little bit about technique. We should have actually spent a lot more time on it than the last 12 minutes on it. So, so if you have background in alpine skiing, you know, if you're, regardless of where your ability level lies, whether you're a snowplower, intermediate, you know, stem Christie, wide track parallel, everything that you can do on alpine skis with locked heel, you can basically do on cross-country skis. Even narrow cross-country skis, but the narrower the ski, the harder it is to do it, okay? The more bottom camber and the narrower the ski and the less side cut. So that being said, the differences between controlling your skis downhill with more minimal equipment than downhill boots. Alpine touring boots are downhill boots. They just have the ability to flip a little lever, and so you have range of motion to tour. And of course your heel is lifting. And then you can lock it down, just like it's basically a downhill ski when you're going down. But you don't have that ability with free heel gear. So the differences are, what we teach in our classes is the support that you get, the evolution of downhill skiing has gone from, this is about how much support in the boot that I had when I was 10 years old and I learned to alpine ski. And there was a famous skier by the name of Stein Erikson that he was the guy that always said, bend the knees. The reason one wants to bend your knees with minimal gear is that you don't have the support of a plastic cast on your foot, forcing your knees forward and being able to pull against it with your heel locked, okay? So the difference is the technique is essentially the same, not speaking of the telemark at the moment, but taking your alpine experience for those of you that are alpine skiers, the technique is essentially the same, but the difference is you've got to do the work through your skeleton and your muscles and your technique and your balance that this boot does. So it requires practice to get used to doing that. And I emphasize two things a lot in my lessons when I'm teaching people to ski and control downhills. And this applies not only to turning, but if you're going straight down a steeper hill that you're going to be gathering speed for. You want to keep that compressed position. And the more you can lock your knees forward with your butt, with your hip, not scooting your butt out, but hips forward, knees bent, the more you're like a spring. So there's a lot of variability of the terrain. You know, you'll hit places where you'll hit bumps and it'll accelerate or decelerate. And the more flexible, if you're standing up straight, you're like, ooh, okay, you've got a high center of gravity and you can't really absorb anything. You're not a dynamic creature. You're a static being, going down the hill. So you got to maintain that dynamicism, that flexibility by keeping the knees forward, the hips forward, and your hands in front. And we'll get into more of that in the lessons. So is there something you want to say about that?
No.
Okay.
I was going to ask one really important question, though, because we kind of touched on that. What is the right number of skis to own? Boom!
Same with motorcycles.
N+1. Or how many skis can you comfortably fit into the space that you have in your house? Which for me, I live in 680 square feet, and I think I have 68 pairs of skis.
So another thing to keep in mind is that if you're skiing, if you're going from Meissner where things are groomed, you've got a lot of room to step out of the track, maybe do a wedge, a braking wedge to slow yourself down. A lot of the things that we're skiing on the trails are more confined. Remember, you don't have a groomer out there grooming like a skate track. So you're limited to this track. So a lot of times you're going down a hill, and one of the things that you'll practice is stepping off into the softer snow, because the softer snow will slow you down more than staying in what can sometimes be classified as an icy luge run. Okay. So the telemark is a really important technique, not just for turning, but to get used to being in that telemark position where you have the trailing ski in the front and the leading ski in the front and a trailing ski in the back, because it gives you the ability to do what an alpine boot does, because by virtue of you're locked in that forward position and your heels locked, that it gives you stability forward and back. A lot of stability this way. So it's like you're going down a hill and you're accelerating, and then you hit some slushy, sticky stuff, and it's like you have the ability to recover, once again, being a dynamic entity rather than somebody that's going to get boom, throw forward on their face, right? Because you get that weight on that front leg.
The other thing you're doing is lowering your center of gravity. You know, if someone, push me over, Mark.
You're not a pushover.
If he tries to push me over, chances are pretty good he can. Now push me over. I'm much more stable, right? Because my center of gravity is lowered and I've lengthened my contact patch contact patch, because my skis are now separated, I've got a much longer contact patch. So the telly position, not turning or not, the telly position is a super stable position.
It's super stable front to back.
Yeah.
Just like I showed, with you. But if I'm standing like this and I push from the side,
Yeah.
I don't have as much. I have more lateral stability from the side when I'm like this than when I'm like this. And so that's why learning to do the telemark position and move into the telemark turn takes a bit of adjustment of your balance centers to get used to being in this position while your weight is split between two skis. And that's what Woody does really well. So if you want to do there's still room in the tele class.
There's still room in those clinics.
Yeah, and I will say this too about, again, back to the equipment, because we keep harping on that, but this ski with this boot, that's a great beginner telemark setup. Can I ski the backcountry with it? Yeah. Can I go ski a resort with it? Yeah. Had someone yesterday skiing with this setup. Got to have a leash on it, which is easy to add a leash to this. You cannot add a leash to an NNNBC, but you can add a leash to this very easily. But if you said, hey, I'm kind of interested in this telemark stuff, that's a great way to go, because you still have a backcountry ski setup, but you can go to the resort. Because one way to think about it is, and Jeannie's kind of going through this right now, and that is just like, okay, I want to learn the telemark turn. Okay, I'm going to ski to the top of this hill, and then I'm going to ski down. And I'm going to ski to the top of this hill, and then I'm going to ski down. How many times are you going to do that? Maybe 3. How quick are you going to learn the telemark turn? As opposed to, I'm going to sit on the lift, and now I'm going to go ski down, and I'm saving my legs for what I'm really trying to learn. So even if you have no intention of ever being a resort telemark skier, but you want to learn a turn and a technique that is good in the backcountry, the resort is still the best place to do it.
The most valuable technique for control on the downhill as you're getting into this is a braking wedge maneuver. So it's basically a snowplow, a rolling snowplow. You want to practice being able to use that braking wedge to a stop when you need to. In case a weasel darts out in front of you, and you're like, oh, it's a weasel. So you need to stop quick. It'll build your confidence. But most of the trails you're going to be skiing within the Nordic trail system around here, they're generally pretty narrow. And if enough people are skiing it and already snow plowing down it, you've got enough room to do a straight braking wedge going straight down the hill. But telemark turns, for most people, parallel turns, linked turns, that's something that comes into play when you're in more open terrain, okay, and in the right conditions for your level of skill. Anything else you want to say about that?
I would say that the other big one, and if you ski with me, I'll drill it and drill it and drill it, step turns.
That's what you just reminded me. So if you're ever on you come out on a trail, or you've been doing an off-trail trip and like, oh my God, how did we get here? Look at how steep this is. You can always get down with if you don't know how to do a kick turn, which is basically this, changing directions, you can always get down anything doing a long, low-angle traverse, reducing the angle of the fall line, do a long, low-angle traverse, do a kick turn, traverse back. You're basically doing what expert skiers like Woody and others do with linking their telemark turns or linking parallel turns. All they're doing is doing the same thing that you do with kick turns and traverses, but it looks way cooler. So. We have 2 minutes before we have to pick up the chairs and get out of here. Actually, they're going to close at 8 o'clock, so we got a few minutes. Is there any questions, quick questions? Yes?
What is your favorite day out skiing?
Oh,
What does it look like?
that's pretty
Ooh.
much every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like a certain place, or like you take lunch, you hit a warming hut, or you just. Go
I
along?
like, for me, my favorite thing, Woody probably is going to answer the same sort of thing, is climbing up stuff like Tumalo and skiing down, regardless of the conditions. Because if the conditions are good, meaning easy to turn, then that's fun. If the conditions are bad, which I don't like that term because there is no bad snow, just like there's no bad dogs, it's only inadequate technique to handle it. I like that too because then it's a challenge. It's like, oh, how am I gonna cope with this? Woody.
That's a very, very easy one for me to answer. Full moon. I go out every full moon. Full moon. Last year,
Because he's actually a werewolf.
last year in
That's-
December, we had no snow, as you might remember. It was a full moon. There was no chance of seeing the moon because it was 32-ish degrees and raining. And surprisingly, I couldn't get anybody to go with me, but I hiked into the swampy shelter. I had some dinner. I might have had some other adult kinds of things. And I had a wonderful evening. Full moon for me. Full moon skis. In which you start out in the dark and then the full moon comes up and you might need your headlamp some, but then you get to this big open area and you've got lots of moonlight because the moon has come up. Skiing without a light is magic.
Sounds pretty great.
It's magic.
Thank you,
Yeah,
everybody.
thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Can I ask, those of you who don't have to jet, would you have to put the chairs back on the rack so